everybody to be on with you tonight because, again, you're going to hear some amazing stuff after about 7 months of Tim pretty much working 18 hours a day and everybody doing just an amazing job. I think it's important that people understand that the release of the Unholy Sea is absolute paralleled with Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. Now, I would say this. The Scripture is very clear in its explaining that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established. What Tim found out, what his interviews will provide people with, is finding out where the alien narrative came into being, who was behind it. And the alien narrative is simply what Tom's been warning about in Exo Vaticana and Chris has been writing about. All their efforts and our efforts dovetailed. Now, I think it's going to be important for people to understand that this information is the great deception. There are many deceptions, and as David Langford said the other night, the last words of Jesus were, "See that you be not deceived." Now, what's critical is that as we're seeing the one world government forming, as we're seeing the evangelicals come together with the televised presence of the Pope, at the Washington Monument, I think on the 16th of this month, you're seeing the greatest fulfillment in headline history of all those things that we were warned about: a one world government, a one world financial system, and a one world religion. So as we go into this True Legends, the DVD, The Unholy Sea, I'll let Tim explain and go into great detail what it is that all of our studies to date have found, and one thing leads to another. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Timothy Alberino. He was the writer and the director of this. I was the producer. I brought the stuff together, but Tim was a remarkably, how should I say this, directed by, I believe, the Holy Ghost to do this thing. And I want to make it clear, this is not a bashing of Catholics. It is not a bashing of Catholics whatsoever. What it is exposing the agenda that ultimately got Malachi Martin, whether you believe he was murdered or not, I can tell you in no uncertain terms based on who I've talked to, yes, he was murdered. And the greatest war that's taken place in the Catholic Church is yet to come between traditional historic Catholics and the, I would call, transformative Catholicism that will reject all of the previous premises of the Roman Catholic Church. So what we're talking about tonight, just to hit it straight on, Doug, so you don't get the emails and I don't get the emails, is the strange behavior. It's not strange when taken in context. The strange utterances coming out from the Unholy See, and what we found to date. Now, obviously, we fund our projects by the sale of DVDs, and what we've done this year that's different is we've allowed them for a Vimeo that people can have, Tim, is it unlimited? What is it, unlimited viewing
it's
around
unlimited
the world.
streaming.
So, unlimited streaming, thank you. So with no further ado, I will introduce you to the director and the writer of True Legends, Timothy Alberino. And Tim, I want you, as you know, I want you to hit it as hard as you can. Never hold back, because Doug's audience is, very, as you know, and I know, they're up to speed, but they don't, I think, still understand. Most don't understand why you're out traipsing around the world and we're on talk radio talking about this True Legends, the thing that I've written about for all these years. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for having me on this evening. Thank you, Doug. And I want to start off by, we're going to start from the top and work our way down in terms of the content of this film. As Steve likes to say, cover the bottom line first. And the bottom line is this: the greatest deception that the world has ever seen is about to unfold in the world. And that is a definitive statement. It's a statement that both Steve and I can make without any qualms. And I want to explain to people, first of all, that when we talk about the Unholy See, the term the Holy See is the official name for the institution of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. In other words, the Vatican. So the Holy See is the political title. It's the historical title of the power, of the seat of power of the Pope of Rome and of the institution of Rome. And that's why we call our film The Unholy See. Actually, there's a number of reasons why we call it The Unholy See rather than The Holy See, as it is known. And one of those reasons is because we believe that the Pope of Rome, and specifically the institution of Rome, is going to be at the center of the deception that I just mentioned, the greatest deception the world has ever seen. And it has to do with, again, as Steve mentioned, the work that Tom and Chris Putnam are doing and have been doing. They just closed out their series of books dealing with this subject matter. By the way, Steve and I, were not intending to focus on the Holy See in this second installment of our True Legends, the documentary film series. But as we discovered, all roads lead to Rome, just like the old saying goes. And it is in fact true, especially when you're dealing with the cover-up relating to the world before the flood of Noah, the cover-up relating to the prehistoric past, again, i.e. the world before the flood of Noah, and the deception that's coming in the future, the narrative that is going to play out in front of our eyes in the near future. And that narrative has to do very specifically with the idea that the human race is not alone, nor has ever been alone in the universe, and that we have alien saviors, alien brothers, if you will, that have been guiding humanity, and some will say that created humanity, and their existence is going to be announced at some point in the near future. And again, we believe that that announcement is going to come from the Holy See, from the seat of papal power in the Vatican. And we have a number of reasons for believing that. And some of our reasons have to do with some of what we uncovered while in Rome, because we actually went to Rome on the expedition that we completed late last year. And again, we were not planning on going to Rome. It just so happened that that is where we ended up. And we believe that that's the way that God orchestrated this. And he put his finger on the Holy See and directed our attention to really deal with this issue, because I believe that this is the most important issue that not only Christians and the church is going to face, but also the world at large. Because when they finally make the announcement that these extraterrestrials are real, that we're not alone, that we haven't been alone, and by the way, the Vatican is very likely going to produce artifacts, documents and artifacts to prove that claim. And when I say documents and artifacts, we're talking about artifacts, documents and artifacts that are hidden away in the vaults and the archives beneath the Vatican, artifacts that relate to the world before the flood of Noah, that fit into a biblical context, but are going to be used to push a narrative that is wholly unbiblical. And it's probably going to dovetail with those of you who are familiar with Zecharia Sitchin's work in the Anunnaki and Nibiru and that whole, the Sumerian mythology. It's going to be something like that, if not exactly that. And one of the really interesting things that we do in our film, The Unholy See, is we got the chance to talk with a man a very, very famous man, and a very famous Italian man, who was personal friends with Zecharia Sitchin. And we learned some things about Zecharia Sitchin that we hadn't known before, and I guarantee you that the audience listening to us tonight probably doesn't know either about Zecharia Sitchin. And Steve and I deal with, in this film, we deal with the Sumerian mythology. We deal with the proper understanding. We take it apart and we show you what it really is. And I think that people who have been confused about ancient astronaut theory, people who have been wondering how Zecharia Sitchin's work fits in with the biblical narrative, I'm pretty sure we answer all of those questions in this film. And those are questions that many people have. And our desire, part of our desire when making this film, was to reach out to the so-called Sitchins, that very large community that has swallowed hook, line, and sinker the narrative of the ancient Sumerians and the Anunnaki and all of the mythos of the Sumerians that is connected with it. And we show them why we want to show them why the biblical view is better, is truer, is the accurate perspective when looking back into the time of the Sumerians. And by the way, when we say Sumer, when we talk about the Sumerians, we are talking about Nimrod. We are talking about the Tower of Babel. We're dealing with the first rebellion on the earth after the flood of Noah, because as we know, there was a great rebellion against God before God destroyed the earth in the flood. But there was also a great rebellion after the flood, and that was led by Nimrod, the great rebel, the great reprobate. And we break that down, and we show you what that was about and why it's important to remember what happened at the Tower of Babel and how all these dots connect. In other words, how the Sumerians and the Tower of Babel and Nimrod and Zechariah Sitchin and aliens and the Vatican, how it all connects to what's about to unfold on the earth. I'll kick it back to you, Steve. I don't know where you want to go from here.
Well, I think that it's important that just as Babylon 1 existed with Nimrod and the whole attitude of that which they all agreed to do, that it took the living God in scrambling their language to keep them from doing it at that time. Exactly. Right now, Doug, and we're going into the time period of genetic Babylon. I called it genetic Armageddon. I call it xenogenesis, but for tonight we'll call it genetic Babylon. And what's critical is the alien tampering with the human race. Now, in our film, we have the actual pilot who flew the dead giant out of Bagram Air Force Base in 2005. We don't show his face because obviously Tim and I even love him a lot, and we don't want any harm to come to him. But the thing is, it's interesting now because I've been told that others are picking up on that theme, and the pilot actually said, "Hey, Steve, one of my critics who went public and said I was full of you-know-what, now is incorporating it through someone else into his." Well, here's the thing, Doug. The greatest difficulty in explaining this to people is, as in the days of Noah, to rebuke one female who has every calling from apostle, prophet, evangelist, teacher, until I told her, well, she's a lady, so she might as well get it right and be called a prophetess. She said, "You're taking an obscure passage." Well, this is more than an obscure passage, because the giants were born of the fallen angels' union with earth women. Now, a fallen angel is not a giant. A fallen angel can transform themselves, even in the New Testament stated, as angels of light. They can look normal. And it's my contention that based on what Tim and the film crew were and finding out and who they were interviewing, it's very real. So let's talk about genetic Babylon. The myths and legends of the pre-flood culture are absolutely astonishing in all of this, if you will, the records and the illustrative detail that they spend about God's judgment on the pre-Adamic race, and this is before Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, can be found in Jeremiah chapter 4, was based on the genetic tampering, and that was the golden age. And since Tim brought up the Sumerians, i.e. Nimrod, they had their records that go back, and it's called the Table of Kings, 650,000 years ago. Well, how does someone take the position that there was, nothing before the creation of Adam and Eve, but then you've got Satan being in the garden of God before the creation of any man, and you've got the fall of Lucifer and the third of angels existing prior to the creation of Adam. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is really a critical thing. God created Adam and Eve in his image, but there was obviously creations that built some of the megalithic structures that Tim has coined cyclopean architecture. There's no human way to engineer it. There's no human way to move it. And to those who want to use the square cube law that there can't be giants, they miss the most important point of all. The fact is gravity has changed on the Earth, and we're talking about half supernatural life force mixed with human life force, so that whole cube root law does not apply to the giants. Now, here's what's interesting, Doug. When we interviewed the pilot on screen, I think you saw the DVD, so I would recommend everybody who's listening to your audience, especially those of you in Australia and New Zealand and Canada and Great Britain and all over the world that speak English, it doesn't matter if even it's your second language, the imagery is so astonishing and remarkable. I won't give out the names of the two individuals that Tim met, but it was can I say this, divine appointment. Keep in mind, all along, we did not correspond with Tom Horn outside of say, I've got a film crew in Europe, where they're in Rome, they're in Malta, they're in Sardinia, and he obviously is doing what he's doing. Now, remember this, ladies and gentlemen, God always bears witness, and he always warns the people of what's coming. The scripture, surely the Lord God will do nothing except he reveals his secrets to his servants, the prophets. The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, and I see so many people on the internet claiming to be prophets of this, prophets of that. It's easy to say Russia's going to go to war with the United States, thus saith the Lord, but where were they 25 years ago? So why is this important? It's important for a clear word. And I'm going to give everybody Matthew 22:25 through 30 to get an understanding, because one of the lead criticisms against fallen angels coming to earth and having sex is what Jesus is quoted as saying here, but pay attention, and I'll spell it out. Obviously, the Pharisees come to Jesus and try and trap him, trick him, whatever. Now, there were with us 7 brethren. The first, when he had married a wife, deceased, and having no issue, left his wife unto his brother. Likewise, the second also, the third unto the seventh. In other words, everybody up to the 7th got the same woman. And at last, and last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her. In other words, they all obviously had sex with her, and whatever the production of that was, whether children from all, I don't know. Now, listen to this. And this is where 99% of the Christian population stands guilty. Jesus answered and said unto them, Ye do err, not knowing the Scripture, nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. In heaven, you don't have angels mating with the redeemed saints, but the fallen angels came to earth, producing the demigods, in other words, the mythological entities of history, and all the Greek gods, and all the Roman gods, and all the Babylonian gods, and all the Egyptian gods. And guess what, Doug? The central theme of all that right now is hybridization, taking the human race and genetically altering it. Now, I find it fascinating that I'm going to turn it right back to you, Tim, and let you deal with the architecture. When we weren't planning on interviewing, and this just came up miraculously. I mean, I love the fingerprint of the living God, not the fingerprints of the gods, which is a great title of a book, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Anselm P. Rumbla, who absolutely, we have the most astonishing interview, and you watched that, correct, Doug?
Yes, sir, and I watched intently that interview with that gentleman, and I was surprised, not shocked, but surprised at what he disclosed from 1982, what happened from 1982 to 1999. Well, I'll just let you go ahead and take it from there.
Okay. Well, Tim, let's talk about the Shinkana, and let's talk about the Coricancha, and let's give people an understanding. There's a reason why, with True Legends, the first episode, we started in Peru. But what's fascinating is the legends. You've even seen guys like Richard Sauter talk about the underground tunnels and the underground cave system that pretty much went throughout the whole Earth. in my book, Empire Beneath the Ice, how the Nazis won World War II, it's imperative to understand not only did Hitler believe it, but he improved upon many of the tunnel structures and systems. And by the way, Tim, after you and I were doing our last interview, I was contacted by a fairly old gentleman who said his father, and I think the gentleman was 80, had helped Hitler relocate from Brazil to Peru. To my knowledge, no one has ever said that publicly. And they relocated him to, you ready for this, an underground citadel in Peru. So, Tim, explain, if you would, the Chincana and the Coricancha and just your interview with Anselm B. Rambla. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, these aren't friends of friends. These are the people that absolutely did the excavations, one of the world's leading archaeologists, and then all of a sudden, the Vatican steps in and shuts them down. What are they so afraid of? So go ahead, Tim. Take it as long as you want it.
Well, the Chincana is a Quechuan word, and Quechuan is the native language that the Incas spoke, and some of the other tribes in South America. And it literally translates to the place where one gets lost. And to this day, historians and archaeologists claim that the Chincana is only a legend, that it's only an old wives' tale. Now, what is the Chincana? The Chincana is, depending on who you talk to, they give you different explanations. But what we found out was that the Chincana is a vast underground network of tunnels and caverns and cyclopean architecture, including entire cities, as Steve just referenced, that were built in the prehistoric past. Now, archaeologists, again, they believe, and historians believe, this is just a legend, and it's a very, very prevalent legend in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and in the Amazon basin in general, and especially in the not just in the Amazon basin. I should say it's very prevalent in the Andes Mountains among the tribal people, but also extends into the Amazon basin. You'll hear about the Chincana going down the Amazon, way down into Brazil, because it's such a massive underground system. But again, it's only legend in the eyes of the historians and archaeologists. But the fact is that it's not a legend. It's real. It exists, and it's been proven to exist. And one of the guys that, in fact, the only guy that I'm aware of that was able to scientifically confirm the existence of the Chincana is a gentleman by the name of Anselm P. Rambla. And Anselm is a Spanish explorer and researcher, and he's a well-known guy. He's done all kinds of research all over the world, dealing with megaliths and other ancient mysteries. And and Anselm does very scientific work. He brings in the right people to do the right jobs. In other words, he brings in people who are university trained archaeologists. He brings in the guys that that operate the ground penetrating radar. He brings the equipment into these areas, and he does a very thorough scientific analysis. In 1982, Anselm P. Rambla was in Cusco studying Sacsayhuaman. Sacsayhuaman's in our film. Many of you have heard of Sacsayhuaman. It's a mile outside of Cusco. It is one of the most impressive megalithic sites on the earth, if not the most impressive. And he was doing a study at Sacsayhuaman, which we'll talk about a little later. But during the course of his investigation at Sacsayhuaman, he heard about the Chincana. The natives were telling him, the local people and some of the native people were telling him about this legend of the Chincana because it is connected to Sacsayhuaman. In fact, Sacsayhuaman, and we show you this in the film. You may be confused now listening to this, but we clarify it in the film. Sacsayhuaman is actually thought to be the hub of the Chincana, where all the tunnels converge, and there are various reasons for that. But he decided to go over to a place called the Convent of Santo Domingo in Cusco, which is a church that is owned and built by the Dominican order, and has belonged to the Holy See, and specifically the Dominicans, since the conquest of Cusco in the 16th century. And so, from the time that the Spaniards, that the conquistadors took the city of Cusco, the church, the Church of Rome, has been in control of this very strategic location. And the reason why it's such a strategic location is because the Incas' most important temple was built in this location before the Spaniards razed it to the ground and built their convent of Santo Domingo. And that temple was called the Coricancha. And the Coricancha means golden enclosure. And it means golden enclosure because the inner walls of the entire complex were covered with sheets of gold. In fact, inside of the Coricancha, the complex that the Inca inhabited and built upon, and I say built upon because it had been a holy site for the natives that occupied it before the Incan Empire, before the rise of the Incan Empire. And in fact, we believe that, and we believe that there's evidence to show that the Coricancha was in fact that the base of the Coricancha, the foundation of the Coricancha, is a pre-flood construction. So of course, anyone who watched our last film understands that subsequent cultures are always building on top of the pre-flood constructions for various reasons. So anyways, the Coricancha, the most holy site of the Inca, covered in gold, sheets of gold. They had an entire garden that was filled with gold and silver, and all kinds of precious artifacts were within the Coricancha. The Spaniards looted it, but they didn't loot all of it. But because before the Spaniards reached Cusco, the Incan king transported most of the gold, the most precious artifacts from their most holy temple. They transported them underground into the Shinkana. The Inca did not build the Shinkana, but they made use of it. They were aware of it, and they made use of it. Now, let me explain a little bit more about the Shinkana. The Shinkana, again, as I said, is a vast tunnel system. It's what we call in our film the ancient equivalent, the antediluvian equivalent of DUMBs, deep underground military bases. It's the same kind of a concept. And it connects natural caverns and natural underground caves. It connects those caverns and those caves that are naturally occurring with artificially constructed underground structures. And when we say artificially constructed, we're talking about cyclopean architecture under the ground. And so anybody who has any kind of inkling in engineering would immediately recognize the problems with a very ancient prehistoric culture building under the ground, and especially building cyclopean walls under the ground. And we're not just talking about small little tunnels. We're not just talking about, for example, the famous tunnels underneath the city of Jerusalem. We're talking about tunnels, in many cases artificially constructed tunnels, running for hundreds of miles under the earth. Hundreds of miles. We can only do that. We could only achieve that kind of construction after the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So obviously we're dealing with high technology. We're dealing with very sophisticated means of building and boring these tunnels, which of course has been lost. That kind of technology has been lost, just like the technology for building the megaliths. So the Inca took their gold, their most precious artifacts, hid them in the Shinkana, and sealed the entrance. One of the main entrances, by the way, the entrances to the Shinkana were kept secret by the Inca, and they were only known to the Inca elite and to the priest class of the Inca, and they were kept secret on pain of death, especially from the Spaniards. And the Inca, many of the Inca elite were put to death and tortured, trying to find out by the Spaniards, who were trying to find out the entryways into the Shinkana. One of the major entryways into the Shinkana was beneath the Coricancha, the most important temple of the Inca, which fell into the hands of the Church of Rome. But before it fell into the hands of the Church of Rome, the Inca king had it sealed up, and the entrance was not discovered until later on. But it was, in fact, discovered later on. We know that for sure because of historical documents and other reasons. It was, in fact, discovered by the clergymen, the Dominicans, at some point later on in history. And we can only imagine what kind of artifacts were extracted, were removed from the Shinkana and transported to the Vatican. And this is the MO of the Church of Rome when dealing with ancient artifacts, when dealing with ancient mysteries and secrets such as the Shinkana. It isn't some sort of a scientific declaration. We've discovered that the Shinkana is real, and we're doing an excavation, and we're going to open it to the public. No, not at all. In fact, it's the very opposite. When the Vatican gets wind of something like this, they strategically occupy those locations, and they build on top of them. And they maintain a presence in these locations to control the artifacts and the knowledge associated with them.
The narrative of history are predisposed to direct their, if you will, interventionist lies into the final outcome. We always quote the Hegelian dialectic. Right. You're watching it in the United States right now. And by the way, for those of you who still don't get it, the United States is undergoing a complete communist revolutionary takeover. And, what we've watched in history, we're now seeing repeated. And for the record, the Vatican is at the heart of it. Look at all of the social gospel that this Pope preaches continually. Look at all of his anti-Jesus statements. Look at all of his all roads lead to Rome, and in his worldview, all faiths lead to God, which is absolutely a complete, how would you say, affront and heresy to what Jesus said when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. And what's interesting, Doug, is that, and here's the thing, Tim was talking about the underground tunnels, and he's tracking them. Those went all the way up into the United States, okay? And some people can't handle that. The United States military did the same thing that the Vatican did. They built their bases on them. Number one, during the Cold War, it made for great fallout shelters. And number two, it controlled history by the fact that within the military, there is a given worldview. And they want everyone to believe in artificial history. It's interesting, isn't it? Artificial history versus artificial intelligence and the entities that go along with it. So when we were talking about all this stuff and interviewing the different people, Tim, would you go into too when you asked, I won't name the guys, but when you asked the gentleman we interview on film, because look, ladies and gentlemen, this film is 2.5 hours. And it's fast-moving. Doug, would you say this is a fast-moving film?
Yes, extremely fast-moving. And take notes, folks. Please take a lot of notes because there's so much information packed in the 2.5 hours. You could have easily stretched this out to 5 hours, guys. I'm telling you, it's that good, and the quality. Not that I'm a film buff or, know what I'm talking about, but it was almost as if I was standing right there next to you in terms of the, the picture quality. Yes.
And I don't know, Doug, if you've got some of the comments coming in, but Tim, if you want to, if you've got them handy, I think it's important for you to understand. We're not here just to say, hey, we did a really neat DVD, buy it. We're here to tell you this, that people are being blown away. It's just like this. It's a jigsaw puzzle. And when you put the Shinkana, when you put the Coricancha, when you put the places like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, Tambo, and by the way, Tim taught me how to speak that, so I'm learning how to speak Spanish, one word at a time. And my whole vocabulary is now probably 20 words. But the thing is, it was interesting. Maybe that's being too generous. But what's interesting is that when we said all roads lead to Rome, look who made the strongest presence in South America. Look who was there at all the empires. And for the record, we went on in True Legends, the first episode, talking about all of the Spanish chroniclers and the writers and how big the skulls were and everything. And even today, Doug, you know, they were talking about a jewel-encrusted female oblong skull that's just been found. So the truth is coming out. Now, why is this critical? Because even in South America, in some of these underground tunnel systems, it was imperative that while Anselm P. Rambla was given permission to go ahead and go into the Shinkana, afterwards the most amazing cover-up took place. Tim, do you want to tell the story of?
Yes, I do, because I started to talk about it, and I got off track, and I don't want to leave people hanging. I mentioned in 1982, Anselm P. Rambla was working at Sacsayhuaman excavating. He went over to the church, the convent of Santo Domingo, which is again the site where the Inca had their Coricancha, their famous temple, and where the access to the Shinkana exists. And he wanted to talk to the head prior. The prior is basically the head priest over at the Dominicans at that convent. And the head prior, he talked to the head prior, and he mentioned to the head prior that he had heard this legend about this thing called the Shinkana that everybody was telling him about, and he heard that it was a wives' tale, and he wanted to know if any of the priests had ever heard of it or know anything about it. And to his surprise, the prior, the priest, the head priest of the Dominicans, looked at him and said, "It's not a legend. It's true." And he said, "If you would like to see it, I'll show you right now." And of course, Anselm P. Rambla was surprised, was shocked by this statement, because the implications of the Shinkana are unimaginable. I mean, again, we try and give you the scope of what we're actually dealing with here. It's hard to build things above ground. It's 10 times harder to build things below ground, especially without the kind of tools we have today. So, anyways, he went into the chapel with the prior, and it was Anselm P. Rambla, a couple of guys from his expeditionary team, and there was a altar sitting over a trap door, and it was very inconspicuous. And so they slid the altar out of the way. They opened up the trap door, and there were some stairs leading down into a secret crypt. And they went down into the crypt, and it was a crypt built by the Dominicans. And the bones were there of some important Dominicans from the past. And as they were down in the crypt, Anselm P. Rambla noticed a wall of bricks. And it was sort of a wall that was sloppily and hastily built, and with mortar, but there was a hole in it, and he asked the priest if he could go and look behind the wall. So they took down a couple of bricks, and they flashed their flashlights into this tunnel. It was a tunnel behind the brick wall, and he found that this wasn't just a tunnel of dirt tunnel. This was a very masterfully crafted tunnel with megalithic cyclopean walls, just like the walls above in the Coricancha, because there's still some of the ruins of the Coricancha still exist. We show you them in our film. And he realized at once that this was the Shinkana. It was real, and he was looking at it. He was flashing his flashlight on the walls, and it was very long. He couldn't see the end of it. And he asked the priest, "Is this the Shinkana?" And the priest told him, "Yes. This is the Shinkana. This particular tunnel runs all the way from beneath Sacsayhuaman, to the fortress of Sacsayhuaman. And then, remember I said at Sacsayhuaman, beneath Sacsayhuaman, it's sort of the hub, and that's where many of the other tunnels converge. So this was one of the tunnels that was connecting to that primary hub. And there the priest was admitting to Anselm that it's not a legend. It's absolutely true, but nobody knows about it. Nobody. It's been kept secret. In fact, he told Anselm that this has been kept secret. This secret has been passed down from prior to prior. And again, the prior is the head priest of the Dominicans. It's been passed down, and they don't speak about it to anyone. In fact, Anselm then said to him, "Well, let me go get the rest of my team, and our cameras, and we'll take the wall down and we'll film. And the priest, and I remember Anselm explaining this to me when I was talking to him, and the priest became very frightened. All of a sudden, Anselm told me that he changed immediately. His expression changed, his tone of voice changed. Suddenly, he changed. And it was all. And I asked Anselm, what do you mean he changed? And he said he was scared at the idea, the notion of taking this wall down. And that gives me, there's a couple of things I want to say about that. But he was scared to take the wall down. He said no, and he said absolutely not. You've already seen too much. I've already shown you too much. I should not have shown you this. This was a mistake. We need to get out of here now. And so he rushed them out of there, and obviously wouldn't let them take the wall down, and rushed them out and kicked them out of the church, and pushed them out the door. Obviously, he had this priest suddenly came to his senses and decided that he had made a grave error in showing Anselm P. Ramla that the Xinkana was real, and that the Dominicans had known about it for centuries and have had access to it. Now, they sealed it up, and I find it interesting that they sealed it up because we don't really say this in the film concerning the Xinkana, but we say it concerning some of the underground stuff beneath Malta. This is what we've realized, and what we knew before we went into making this film, is that there are things, there are creatures, entities still inhabiting the bowels of the earth and accessing these underground tunnels and citadels and cities. And these are very frightening things, and these are very ancient things. And of course, Steve has said many times that there's hives of giants that are still under the earth. And the military knows about these things. If anybody's familiar with the DUMS, the deep underground military bases, specifically with the story of Phil Schneider. If you're not familiar with Phil Schneider, Google him, go on YouTube, check him out. I did an analysis called DUMS, where I talk extensively about the deep underground military bases, how they came about, how they were used in terms of the modern military use of them. They started with Hitler. And in the modern one started with Hitler, and it's very occultic. It's a very secretive thing, not just because they're building out of mind and out of sight, out of mind beneath our feet and doing who knows what. We know they're doing genetic experiments down there, but also because when you go under the earth, just like Steve always says, what's below the ground is far more important than what's above the ground, and that goes for the prehistoric stuff. That goes for the antediluvian stuff as well. And beneath most of the, if not all, of the major archaeological sites all around the world, the pre-flood sites, the megaliths, there are underground constructions and chambers. And in fact, there is very likely an ancient underground network of cities and tunnels and caverns, some artificial, some which were constructed, which are some artificial, some natural, that are very ancient and that span the globe. In other words, a global network of underground constructions. And Steve, you mentioned the Nazis before. Remember what the Nazis were so obsessed with. Hitler and some of the chief officers in the Nazi Party were obsessed with this idea of this race called the Vril that supposedly lived under the ground and had an empire, so to speak, under the ground. And in fact, they went to great lengths to try and discover the entryways into this underground world and make contact with these ancient creatures called the Vril. And so all of this is interconnected. And that's why the underground, these ancient complexes, these megaliths, that's why you're going to find the Catholic Church having a presence there. Or if not the Catholic Church, you're going to find the military of whatever country. Usually you'll find a military presence there, just as we discovered in Bolivia with Tiwanaku. And by the way, I know we're coming to the break here, but by the way, Anselm P. Ramla confirmed for us, because he also did excavations in Tiwanaku. And for those who saw episode 1 of our documentary, you're familiar with Tiwanaku. We were in Tiwanaku in episode 1 and showing you the megaliths and the mysterious things over there. Anselm confirmed to me privately. He said, Tim, what's above ground in Tiwanaku is nothing. He told me, we went in, we excavated, We use ground-penetrating radar. People can't even imagine what's under the ground there.
Well, first of all, when we come back from the break, I'll go into about 10 of the most amazing underground cities. But just so people can go on in their own understanding, while we're on the break, they can go to Cappadocia, Turkey, Cappadocia, Turkey. They can absolutely, Doug, go to Kish, Kish, Iran. I could say something, pretty soon they're going to have to kish everything goodbye, but I couldn't resist. The salt mines in Poland, but we're talking about fantastic cities that already exist. And now when we're talking about Cyclopean architecture and the advanced ability to carve out stone and even liquefy and stuff, I want people to understand, whether you believe it or not, doesn't change history. The people changing history have changed it so you would never come to the knowledge of the truth. We come back in the next hour, we'll get into the knowledge of the truth. Right.